Well, happy Easter to everyone. So there's a mysterious photo floating around the internet and a rumor that the Easter Bunny woke up with a little bit of tickle in his throat and is self-isolating this morning. So I'm not sure if he made it to your house, but don't worry, I've got lots of extra. It's so exciting to have you join us online today. We've had people from as far away as New York and Orlando tune in, and we'd love to hear from you, especially if this is your first time ever engaging or connecting with us. Just leave a comment on one of our social media sites. So maybe you're here because this is your regular church, or maybe you're a friend and received a personal social media invitation from me, or maybe you were just curious about the whole Walking Dead theme. Well, I'm Pastor Doug, and it is Easter. Yes, this is the Super Bowl of Sunday services. Did you know churches have more visitors for Easter Sunday than for Christmas or Mother's Day? It'll just be a little different this morning. Maybe you are dressed up in your Sunday best, but you'd probably be more comfortable in your PJs. Either way, you're more than welcome. So why all the fuss about Easter anyway? Why? Because the time Jesus was here on earth, including his historically documented life and death and resurrection, that time when he actually walked among us was easily the most significant moment in history. Just think about it for a second. All of time is centered around his life. Every historical event before him, every historical event after him, every time we write a date, every time we look at a calendar or look at our phones, every time you celebrate your birthday, they all point back to that moment when Jesus was here on earth. And so Easter is when we celebrate life over death, hope over despair, faith over fear, and peace over panic. And we desperately need all of those things right now through these difficult times. So yes, big surprise, this morning is going to be about the resurrection of Jesus and hope, although with a little bit of a different twist, because you see, our culture today is obsessed with the dead rising, but mostly in this crazy zombie sort of way. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I have a true, fun, and a little bit scary story for you that will be very relevant to what we say today. So, if you want, go ahead and close your eyes and listen carefully.
It was just before midnight on a Friday evening in May back in 1986. The fog that blanketed the city had started to slowly seep into the graveyard like ghostly fingers accented by the pale beams of moonlight escaping through the clouds. The isolated cemetery, which stood high up on a hill overlooking the lights of the city below, was a beautiful, tranquil place during the day. But come nightfall, the large old trees bent and creaked from the wind and cast menacing shadows on dark, dusty crypts that held secrets and mysteries. The weather-worn wrought iron fences surrounding them were no longer standing straight and true, and the chains keeping people out or in were long since rusted and nervously held the gates closed. One of the 6 college students who ventured onto the grounds that evening had decided that this was a fun way to celebrate the end of school. But the sobering silence of her 2 young South American friends had the 6 of them feeling increasingly uneasy. After all, graveyards, zombies, and the Walking Dead were far more terrifyingly realistic in their culture's history than that of their North American classmates. But hesitantly, they all spilled out of their cramped transportation and nervously stood around. The excitement of the young blonde ringleader was evident, and she urged everyone to start exploring their spooky surroundings, which were dead, quiet, and isolated this late at night. The only sound and movement was the rustling of leaves as the wind wound through the decrepit old trees. All of a sudden, everyone jumped as two Harley-Davidsons roared into the parking lot and slowly circled it before exiting and continuing on their way. Unnerved by the unexpected interruption, their hearts raced even more than before. Maybe they should leave. That wouldn't be so bad, would it? However, the young instigator of this midnight mayhem urged them to start exploring and skipped off in delight, the others reluctantly following, nervously looking back over their shoulders. Eventually, they all cautiously made their way to the far end of the graveyard, where a large crypt menacingly protruded through the encroaching fog, eerily painted with blue beams of moonlight. There they gathered, peering through the black and the fog into the shadows of the dark tomb, the rusty wrought iron fence creaking in the breeze. The stone coffin rested menacingly inside the crypt just beyond their outstretched reach. What could be scarier than this? Not much at this point, they thought. Except for the young blonde girl. Isn't this so amazing, she said. Just imagine the history here. It's so fun and mysterious. And as she finished speaking, whether it was their overactive imaginations or the slight breeze or something even more sinister, one of the six thought they saw a movement and screamed in terror, "I saw something move!" Immediately, all six spun away from the crypt and began racing across the graveyard to the parking lot, with our young ringleader trailing the other five. Halfway to their vehicle, the group froze as the young lady let out a blood-curdling scream from behind them. Terrified, the five of us whirled around to see my girlfriend Tina stuck and beginning to sink into an old, withered grave.
Wow, how does this story end? Don't worry, just stay tuned and we'll get to the end of it shortly, I promise. So, why zombies this morning? Really, Easter morning, of all times, why zombies? Because society today is not only desperate for hope, but they're desperately hoping that there is something more to this life than simple materialism, meaning more than what they can just feel or see. They want to know that there is meaning. They want to know they are loved and valued. They want to know there is a purpose for their existence, and especially during times of crisis. Like the one we're currently experiencing, we see how far society will go to feel some sense of security and control, even if it's found in a roll of toilet paper. I think the hardest thing for me personally, and for many of us, is that we had all these goals and plans for 2020, and we were moving forward with our lives, and all of a sudden, wham! We find ourselves in this holding pattern. And now we're all stuck, and our lives and our future are full of uncertainty. That is why, in the middle of a crisis, we need to hear about hope. And during these times of crises, people are looking for answers. And as strange as it seems, zombie themes have provided us clues and insight into what has been going on in society. Way back almost 100 years ago, in 1932, the first feature-length zombie film starring Bela Lugosi reflected the hopelessness and the powerlessness of that most Americans felt during the Great Depression. And then 35 years later, in 1968, George Romero's classic Night of the Living Dead addressed society's underlying racial tensions during the Civil Rights Movement. Dawn of the Dead in 1978 has zombies taking over a shopping mall, and the story warned us of the dangers to our souls of the excesses of consumerism. Then, through the 80s and 90s, movies like Day of the Dead and Army of Darkness and Evil Dead focused on these mindless swarms that would eat human flesh and brains and tried to destroy the essence of our identities, who we really were. So what about today? What is the problem with zombies today? So we enter a new century, and zombie movies like 28 Days Later and World War Z and the extremely popular TV series The Walking Dead take hopelessness to a whole new level by embodying our fears of a virus or infection that is rapidly affecting the entire human race. How real and relevant is that today? I mean, really, right now. But today's zombies are also a reflection of our post-Christian culture with its focus on materialism, meaning that the only things that matter to us are what I can touch and what I can feel. And when this is combined with the rejection of a faith in God, which creates a perfect storm that feeds a fatalistic and nihilistic worldview where hope is rarely seen, and those who survive are often entirely void of love and compassion and sacrifice for each other. So, zombies versus Easter. It's a harsh reminder that the incredible hope found in Easter and Christ's true resurrection from the dead has been replaced in society by dark despair and a counterfeit resurrection. This is clearly spelled out in two classic lines from The Walking Dead Season 2, where lead character Rick Grimes admits, "We're all infected. Whatever it is, we all carry it." And then another character who is described as a man of faith says, "I can't profess to understand God's plan. Christ promised the resurrection of the dead. I just thought he had something different in mind." And just to see how far and even twisted the darkness and hopelessness have carried us, Richard Dawkins, the famed evolutionary biologist and avowed atheist, he even went to the extreme of tweeting to his 2.9 million followers in 2018. He tweeted about growing human meat from human stem cells that could be consumed by other humans. Wow. But first we'd have to overcome our taboo against cannibalism. Can you believe it? You see, the rejection of God and then the logical extensions of atheism and materialism eventually reach an inevitable conclusion of extreme hopelessness where there is no purpose or no value to human life. And the flesh-eating zombie idea is no longer a far-fetched fantasy. So, how do we find a cure for our broken souls? At the heart of the zombie metaphor lies our need to understand our very existence, Do I have a purpose? Can we extract good from all of that darkness? Is there hope in the middle of seemingly insurmountable despair? Solomon, history tells us, was the wisest king who ever lived. And he said that without understanding the purpose of our lives, without knowing why we are here, and without a comprehension of why God created us, we will simply wander through life, aimlessly stumbling about, living a zombie-like existence. But wait, you say, some of us have achieved success. We've lived a good life, yet our lives are still empty. Life is still hell on earth, and we feel like the walking dead, and it eats away at our soul, and we think, is this all there is to life? Is this really all there is to my zombie existence? And then many of us, including myself, who as Christ followers, we gave up our zombie life long ago, but we still have rotten flesh hanging on and things in our lives like judgment or anger or criticism or gossip or lust or other things that are unacceptable. And these things are shadows from our zombie past. We know that all of us, you and I, are infected from birth by a disease of the human soul called sin. And our futile, empty attempts to reach God on our own, to find out our purpose, to find life's true meaning, to do life without God's help, it will all fail. And then we go into survival mode and we reluctantly embrace what we think is our inevitable dark destiny.
Because this is how we survive. We tell ourselves that we are the walking dead.
So, there must be more to life than just surviving. But first, let's go back to where we left off in our scary story. So as I said, the five of us heard my girlfriend Tina scream, and we whirled around to see what was wrong. And there she stood with one of her legs almost knee-deep in the withered old grave. And she was desperately trying to pull her leg out. And you have to understand that in that moment, even though there was some love and feelings for her as my girlfriend, and even though there was a surge of adrenaline to go be her hero, yeah, I paused. I hesitated. I did. 33 years of marriage later, I've learned that pause, that hesitation, is very bad. However, I was young and naive back then, and fear did initially hold me back. But I shook it off and I ran towards her, my heart pounding. So I reached down and helped her pull her leg free, only to find that to my horror, her shoe was still stuck 2 feet down in that old grave, and she was not leaving without her shoe. Did she reach down into the grave to pull it out? No, of course not. As the hero of my own story, I was expected to do so. And fear and common sense caused me to again hesitate. Was true love really a good enough reason for me to stick my hand 2 feet down into an old, decrepit grave? Surely while I was reaching down, something or someone else was likely reaching up to grab me and pull me down. No shoe was worth that much. except to her, of course. So love prevailed, and I reached into the grave and I pulled out that shoe. No longer was it just a $20 shoe, but it was like the MasterCard commercial says. That shoe was now priceless. After all, it could have cost me my arm and my life. And yes, there is some humor in this story, but you have to understand the much bigger picture, God's story. Easter is all about the love of God reaching down into the grave and raising Jesus from the dead when we deserve to die, when we deserve death because of our sin, because of my pride and determination to do things my own way. God conquered and defeated death on my behalf, on our behalf. There's a verse that says, "Yet the proof of God's amazing love is this, that it was not when we were perfect, not when we were without mistakes, but it was while we were sinners. Despite the fact that we screwed up and messed up, that Christ died for us." So like a beautiful oasis in a post-apocalyptic zombie desert, Christ's true resurrection from the dead, as celebrated at Easter, provides the ultimate expression of hope for all of humankind. The complete and one and only cure from sin, which is the disease of the human soul that has plagued us all since creation. On Good Friday, Pastor Nathan explained how Jesus had to die because that was the only cure to break the grip that sin had on us. So in closing, we see that the resurrection of Jesus is the only true answer, the only true defeat of death. And there's a really cool verse that I want to show you this morning. And it says, if corpses can't be raised, then Christ wasn't, because he was indeed dead. And if Christ wasn't raised, then all you're doing is wandering about in the dark, as lost as ever. Definitely a zombie existence. It's even worse for those who died hoping in Christ and the resurrection, because they're already in their graves. If all we get out of Christ is a little inspiration for a few short years, we're a pretty sorry lot. But the truth is that Christ has been raised up, the first in a long legacy of those who are going to leave the cemeteries. There is a nice symmetry in this. Death initially came by a man, and resurrection from death came also by a man. I want us to watch a quick clip.
I became an artist through the portal of grief. My mother died at her own father's graveside. As he was being lowered into the ground, she had an aneurysm. I was 14. She left me, but she left me an artist. I began the journey, trying to fill the hole in my heart with music, with my mates, my bandmates. And finally, the only thing that can fill it is God's love. And it's a big hole, but luckily there's a big love. It's like the wound never quite closes. So death is very important. But you know, I went finally to Jerusalem on a family pilgrimage. And I went to Golgotha. And I went to the site where, and I had some time on my own, where death died. And I was like, wow, there it is. That's where death died. And so I don't really believe in it anymore. So it's not it has no power over me as it had when I was 14 years old.
Wow, that was so cool. Because God loved us so much, Jesus defeated death, and it no longer has power over us because of his resurrection. That is why we celebrate Easter. Another verse says, we know we have left death and have come into life because we love each other. It's so interesting that there was a zombie movie about 7 years ago that actually showed a zombie who, through love, was being brought back to life. So today, this morning, on Easter Sunday, God, through his amazing love, wants to turn your zombie existence from one of the walking dead to that of a purposeful, incredible life. Because he defeated death on your behalf, God can resurrect your dreams. He can resurrect your hopes. He can resurrect your shattered relationships. He can take your broken zombie marriage and resurrect it into a real, live, loving marriage. God can turn the hopelessness that we feel today into hope and a purpose. Jesus conquered death by love, through love, and for love. God's love is the bridge from death to life, and his love removes all fear and uncertainty that we all have about our future. We need God's love more today than ever before. God loves you unconditionally and accepts you just the way you are. There is nothing you can do to make God love you more, and there is certainly nothing you can do to make God love you less. This morning, I'm going to lead you in a simple prayer, and we're going to put it up on the screen, and I'd like you to pray along with me, and that means you can just read it quietly to yourself if you want. So, God, I'm really frustrated with my life. I'm really scared of all the uncertainty. Many times I feel like a zombie just going through the motions. But this morning I realized that you died and were resurrected for me, for my screw-ups and sin. Please forgive me for doing things my own way without you. I accept the free gift of your love. Please come into my life and my world today and give me a fresh start. If that's the first time you've ever talked to God or said a prayer like that, we would love you to connect with us. So please text LIFE to 587-323-1199. Or you know what? You can get a hold of me personally as well if you want. So thank you so much for joining with me on this incredible Easter Sunday. God bless you and comfort you and keep you safe.